potential development around the Ogden Dunes portion of the Portage Ogden Dunes South Shore Station. So before I turn the virtual microphone over to Carolyn, let me begin by setting the stage for the process. The RDA was given the task as part of its establishing legislation to assist in developing and furthering commuter rail in Northwest Indiana. And it's part of a strategy to increase the connectivity with Chicago and to grow the economy of our region. And the state provided funding, and in the 2015 and then again in the 2017 legislative sessions, made it very clear that the RDA was to take the lead in the financing of the rail expansions. Further, in 2017, the state did task the RDA with assisting the municipalities in which the stations were situated and provided funding mechanisms to help in planning for and financing their own transit-oriented development. So I think if we can go to the next slide, which should be the planning entities. Thank you. So here I would say during the past 2 years, the RDA has been meeting with our station area community leaders to understand their own visions and planning concepts for TOD. The RDA has pulled together a planning team to assist in these efforts, consisting of MKSK, whom you will hear from a lot tonight, KPMG and Policy Analytics, and we will all be available towards the end of the presentation during the Q&A part of the program. This virtual meeting tonight is the next step in the process of what we consider bringing a unique set of development tools into play to help grow the Northwest Indiana economy and further establish a high quality of life for our region. And just as a matter of an update for the Westlake Corridor project, as many of you probably heard, on October 28th, the Federal Transit Administration signed the grant providing the funding to make the Westlake Corridor project a reality. So the Northwest Indiana Commuter Transportation District, NICTD, the rail operator, they're already working with their design and construction teams to begin the 4+ years of work to make the Westlake line operational. But I would say this, that the RDA tonight in convening this meeting, we're moving forward on our own separate mission, which is to ensure that the best options for development around the station areas are considered, agreed to by the communities, and eventually funded and put into place. So the next slide should be the role of the RDA here. And you can see what's on the screen, but really the role of the RDA is to help communities create more attractive, secure neighborhoods. And excuse me, as we navigate through this process, we really are enabling our communities to compete for the young professionals that work in Chicago and make our communities more attractive for the businesses and the people who will eventually work in Indiana. So the RDA wants to work with you to strengthen your community, to help enhance what you love about it and enhance your livability. So whatever your interest is, whether you're a resident, developer, a business owner, stewards of our community, we are very grateful for your willingness to participate in this conversation tonight. And we look forward to making this a very successful development process. So with that, I will hand it over to Carolyn Saxton to say a few words about the Ogden Dunes portion around the Portage Ogden Dunes South Shore Station. And again, just want to thank you all for your time and participation tonight. So Carolyn, over to you.
Great, thank you, Sherry. Appreciate it. And I also appreciate the fact that you're willing to give our residents the opportunity to share their concerns, to ask their questions, to give their opinions, and take that into consideration, all of that into consideration as all of this is developing. I just would like to give a little bit of a background on how I became involved in this. The FTA, which is the Federal Transit Association, I think is the original term for it, had asked actually Dick Meister and myself to be two people out of a number of people who would go on a bus tour to get an understanding of what this whole project was going to be about. And as a result of that, we had some questions that we brought to the town council, and the town council presented those questions to NICTD. We have gotten some positive response from some of those issues that we raised, and I would like to thank the council and the residents for the input that they provided for that. I was appointed then by the town council to represent Ogden Dunes at these meetings, which have been going on for probably, I want to say, 2 years, perhaps. And those have been quarterly meetings where we've talked about not just the plans around Portage and Ogden Dunes, but the plans for each one of the communities that is on this South Shore Line Double Track project. And so here we are tonight. We have also had one other presentation, and that was from NICTD, and that was also a public meeting, not quite in the same vein as this one. I really do appreciate that the RDA provided the gallery shots that were down at our town council or down at our community center over the past couple of days, so that people could go in, get an idea of what was being proposed, and to provide their feedback on that. And I encourage people tonight to be able to share their ideas in a constructive way, and to ask questions of the RDA about the plans that they may have related to this project. Again, I want to thank the RDA for their help in bringing this this information forward to the residents. And Sherry, thank you and your team so much for being a part of that. And at this, I'd like to turn it over to Eric Lucas, who is with MKSK, to go over some of the information that you're going to see tonight.
Great, thanks a lot, Carolyn. I really appreciate that. And as Carolyn mentioned, I am with MKSK. We are an urban planning and landscape architecture firm assisting the RDA and the team members that you saw on earlier slides with the formation of what we're calling a draft TDD boundary. We'll talk about what that really means in a moment here. But before we get down into the details of that, we just want to zoom back out for a brief moment. I think by now you're all very familiar with the greater project that we're referring to, this regional connectivity to Chicago. And you can see here some of the metrics that are being tracked with this. A significant amount of private investment is expected. A significant amount of public investment is happening at this point. And there's an opportunity here for the region to really leverage this investment with new jobs and growth, and in a way that really complements the way you want to grow. And we'll talk at length about what we mean by that as we move along. Next slide. So for the South Shore Line Double Track project, you can kind of see the length of it here. You're all familiar with this by now. Your Ogden Dunes is more or less right in the middle of the line here. But this project is about a $455 million investment to really promote that connectivity along 25 miles of track. You can go to the next slide. And the Westlake Corridor project, much shorter in length, but a new line entirely, quite a bit of investment, almost $900 million there, that is being invested to create this connectivity along the western side of the state. Next slide. And together you can sort of see the overall total of miles and investment that is will be occurring. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we wanted to make sure that we had in our minds, but also emphasize to you all as community members, is that communities grow at their own pace. So what might be appropriate in East Chicago may not necessarily be the same type of growth that we would expect in Ogden Dunes or vice versa. And so we sort of tracked the kind of growth that has been seen in other communities on the western side of the state line over in Illinois, to just demonstrate that based upon a community's goals, preferences, and priorities, and things that they're aspiring to be, growth can take on a lot of different shapes and forms. And we've also been looking at this not only as a static number, but as you can see here, with transit investment across the state line and different time periods, how that growth has occurred. Next slide, please. That sets the table for a little bit more of a focused conversation for us tonight, really about the Transit Development District in Ogden Dunes. And so before we get into the meat of that, what I'd like to do is suggest that we'll hit upon 4 kind of overarching themes tonight. One, we'll talk about what is a transit development district. The second topic we'll talk about is how we've kind of arrived at the process of working with the communities and developing a draft boundary. Then we'll sort of dive into the specifics of your community, Ogden Dunes, and talk about things we've analyzed. And then we'll also wrap up with talking about the draft TDD boundary that we want to present out this evening. Next slide. And throughout the presentation tonight, you'll see pop-up windows come up. This is an opportunity for you to give us some feedback along the way, real-time feedback. We have some targeted questions that we want to ask. There's also a Q&A box down at the bottom of your screen that you can click on and submit specific questions for us. We want to be able to answer those this evening, so we'll stick around. We'll hope to be done with our presentation in about 40 minutes or so and leave the balance of our time to answer questions as they come up. And then if you haven't been to the website yet, we do have a website that's been populated with a lot of information. It's www.nwitdd.com. This is where you can find information that we've gathered thus far. You'll also be able to go back and look at this presentation again. We're recording this presentation, we'll upload that. So if you have to step out for a couple of minutes or you can't stay on for the entire presentation, don't worry, we'll be on this webpage. There's also ability there to contact us. And of course, as Carolyn mentioned, we also have gallery materials that we've made available to the town, and so that you can peruse those at your own pace. Next slide, please. So please do give us your feedback. I think that's a really important component for us tonight. We want to be sure that our work is proceeding in the right direction. And a lot of what I'll talk about next is kind of how we've sort of structured our work, but what the background is to our work as well. Next slide. And these are the basics. So when we talk about a transit development district, this is kind of a boundary, if you will, that encompasses an area of your community. And this is an area of your community where there could be the potential for economic development and growth. And within this district, this is where we'll be able to promote the kind of growth that you'd like to see. And this is unique to each community. We spend time learning about communities to try to adjust the size and the scale and the location of these boundaries. So this is what we'd like to share out this evening. Next slide, please. And as I've mentioned already, this is not just a line on a map. It's really about trying to understand the ways in which you would like to grow, or the ways in which you would like to see economic prosperity and vitality to continue in your community. And that's what we're trying to capture here. You'll know as we move through this, there are certain things that we're really focused on. And what we always like to say early in these presentations is that we're focused on certain things like creating this boundary, which can be up to 320 acres in one station area. And that this is an opportunity, as Sherry mentioned earlier, to really promote kind of growth across the region and in communities that you're looking for, and that we really want your input. This is not a series of things which we want to point out because this is really important. This effort, creating the boundary, does not change zoning. It does not change your comprehensive planning efforts or your town planning efforts. This is not an act of eminent domain. This isn't a property grab. We're not working with developers and creating these boundaries. This is really a way to promote your community. This is also not the NICTD project. So we know that after having done a couple of these presentations in other communities thus far, there always will be questions about the train line, the station location, the parking lot layout, but that is not our focus. We do encourage, if you have questions about those things, to really get in contact with NICTD and have those conversations with NICTD. Our work here isn't about the train line, it's really about creating this boundary. So that's what we'll focus on, the balance of the presentation. And I mentioned earlier, we're able to draw this boundary up to 320 acres in size. Next slide, please. And of course, because Ogden Dunes is a small community, very little of that overall area would be occurring in Ogden Dunes. Obviously, if you're familiar with kind of TIF districts or other kinds of economic development areas in communities, you know that they often take unique shapes. They don't necessarily follow strict geometries. And so we want to be able to draw the boundary in a way that complements your growth goals. It's strategic and it's targeted. And so what you'll see this evening is kind of a unique shape of the boundary because of those factors. Next slide, please. And the intent of these districts is, as I mentioned, the core goal here is to promote the kind of growth that you'd like to see. But there are benefits to creating these districts in terms of economic tools. And the tools that we have here is that we can capture the incremental growth in local income and property tax revenue. This is incremental growth. This isn't a new tax, it's not a new levy. This is capturing the incremental, naturally occurring growth. And when we capture that growth, what we're able to do with that revenue is reinvest it right back into the community. It has to be reinvested back into this district. So any revenue captured here has to be spent back into the district. So this is a new sort of economic tool that allows more investment to occur in these communities. We can't sort of migrate money or revenue from one community to another or one station area to another station area. So that's a really important point. And that helps to foster that kind of growth that we'd like to see and you'd like to see. And I just mentioned this, that revenue collected in the district is reinvested in the district, and that can be in the form of quite a bit of infrastructure investment, open space investment, trails, lots of things that might be necessary to support economic vitality and attract the kind of investment you'd like to see. And keep in mind that the local community always retains land use and zoning control. So that authority remains with Ogden Dunes. Next slide, please. This is a bit of a difficult slide to go through, but the basic intent here is that if you're familiar with a tax increment finance district, those exist throughout the state, throughout many communities that we're working in, and those are similar in their function. And there might be locations where we're working where this new boundary that we're proposing for the transit development district overlaps with a local tax increment finance district. And where that might occur, it's important to note that the TIF obligations will always be met. And so there is an agreement between the RDA and the local community in terms of the split of those revenues. But by and large, these two things help to complement the same kind of goals that your community has set forth. Next slide, please. And so just a little bit about the actual process here of creating the boundaries. So we've worked quite a bit with Ogden Dunes as well as Portage to this point to try to vet ideas and learn about the communities and to really seek out the right targeted approaches here. That has led to this evening, where we feel like there's an opportunity to share out our progress for your feedback, your input. And that will allow us then to make the refinements that we need to make, and then go to the RDA board with 2 public hearings. And those public hearings would allow for more input. And then at the culmination of all of that, we would take our work to the State Budget Committee for review and final approval of the boundaries themselves. Next slide, please. And now that you've heard a little bit about sort of the purpose of a TDD and what the TDD sort of enables, the Transit Development District enables, now we'll talk a little bit about how we're sort of approaching the study itself. So we have a 4-step process, and we're at step 3 of those 4 steps. And the first step actually started quite a few months back at this point, almost a year ago, was really becoming more familiar with the station area. This begins with a lot of data gathering about the area, the demographics, getting on the ground and walking around and learning as we see things. And then we move into the next step of our process. And this is really where we enhance that learning and broaden it by working with local leadership, trying to understand what you've already planned, the things that you have as goals, things you've accomplished, what you would like to leverage, things that are happening in your community, so that we can really begin to gain more of a qualitative understanding of the community. Next slide, please. And we kind of take that information and we begin to synthesize that, our own analysis with your own sort of goals. And we begin to synthesize that into a set of opportunities and ideas. We also begin to understand sort of the market forces that might be at play. We begin to analyze the infrastructure that exists today, the things that might be necessary to support the kind of growth and things you'd like to see happen in your community. And then we begin to put all that together to create a draft transit development district boundary. And that's where we are this evening. Next slide, please. And then through our work to this point and the information we collect tonight from you, we will then go back and make the revisions that we need to make and update the boundary so that we can get to those public hearings with the RDA board. So that's basically our 4-step process. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned, it's really important for us to get your feedback. So please do, nothing is set in stone. We want to make sure that as we propose the boundary, that this really does reflect where you want to be as a community. We really want to be lockstep with your goals. And as I mentioned, we are arriving at this by really kind of combining the quantitative, the qualitative information, and also the area specific information. And the next slide actually goes into a little bit of detail about that. Because when we look at the vast area in Portage and Ogden Dunes, we want to eventually be very well educated on the opportunities, but also the challenges, to including certain areas within the boundary. We like to understand where maybe there's public land ownership, maybe where there's vacancy and low utilization, maybe where there are things that we want to preserve and protect, good development that already exists, or natural areas that already exist. Of course, we really like to analyze the infrastructure and things that could really be necessary, things that are beneficial already. And so we take all this to account, all this information into account as we really begin to create the edges of the boundary. Next slide, please. And when we arrive at this boundary, which as we mentioned earlier, can be up to 320 acres, we know that there are areas within the boundary that will, sort of be treated differently. So there are opportunities in different communities for different things. There are opportunities within one boundary for many different things. And some of those are listed here. And we like to think of this as our full spectrum of economic tools and development tools. And so some things that exist in the boundary might be great historic buildings that are vacant or underutilized. Those are great adaptive reuse candidates. there might be terrific natural assets, or there might be great districts or commercial areas or neighborhoods that exist that we want to preserve. There could be areas that have maybe fallen a little bit behind, but are still mostly intact that we want to maybe take some strategies to strengthen in the future. There also could be very well organized areas that are just happen to have some, as we call them, missing teeth, maybe some vacant areas that we would say are good candidates for what we call infill. And there also could be large areas, maybe these are abandoned sites or sites that are already being marketed for development that could be good candidates for redevelopment. So we'd like to think of this as our suite of opportunities that we would think through within each and every boundary. And that is to say that we're not proposing that whatever happens inside of a boundary is a candidate for redevelopment. We know that there are lots of things that can happen inside boundaries to complement your community's goals. And that's actually a great way to segue to my colleague, Aaron Kowalski with MKSK. He's going to talk a little bit about what we've learned thus far about your community and what we perceive to be unique qualities and how we want to build upon those to create the boundary. Aaron?
Thanks, Eric. So, over the last 6 to 8 months, we've met several times with Ogden Dunes leadership, and, we've toured the community. We've looked at properties. We know that, Ogden Dunes is a very close-knit community. It's a beachfront community. There's not a lot of area available for future development. A lot of the properties have been developed and the community is built out, so to speak. So we've tried to be really creative in our approach. And, please understand as we go through this next series of slides that we're looking at kind of the art of the possible, but then also looking for your feedback and honestly very candid feedback on things that you want to ensure that we preserve or other ideas that you may have to help us to understand what kind of growth, either a small amount of growth in some targeted areas or preservation or activation or reinvestment that you'd like to see in different areas in your community. We're really here to listen. Next slide, please. So goals, we've really taken this from the town's comprehensive plan and from their website. And, as we look through these, we've strived to think through how to protect the character and stability of residential areas, commercial areas, and recreation areas between, within the small community. Promote orderly development. It's another key tenet that's put forth by the town. Preserve the natural beauty within the community and try to very lightly impact any natural areas, and we're thinking through that as well. And then guide and regulate future growth and development for the benefit of citizens within the community. Next slide. We've looked at the zoning ordinance, and as you can see, by and large part, a lot of the community is zoned residential. There's a small area that is a public water utility. There's some park areas or public spaces, such as the fire station and other areas within. And then there's a small commercial district south of US 12 today. Next slide. We've also, as Eric mentioned, kind of gone a little deeper into a quantitative and qualitative analysis. And this is not only for Ogden Dunes, but then also neighboring Portage, as there will be kind of a future meeting focused on Portage. That's another area we've looked at through this process. We've looked at things like ownership, floodplain. We've looked at land use, both current and kind of future. We've looked at walkability and really tried to understand what could be. And then we've also looked at properties that are either owned and operated by the National Park Service or groups like the Shirley Heights Nature Conservancy that are important to maintain and preserve. So the next series of slides will kind of walk you through kind of what we call the Ogden Dunes portion of the draft TDD boundary. And it's a small area, but before we do that, just to remind folks again of context, the station itself, you guys know where it is. And this is kind of an interesting district, TDD, in that it would be split between both Portage and Ogden Dunes. So there would be acreage in both communities with kind of a focus of, trying to create something really interesting and walkable and something that contributes to both communities in a meaningful way. In accordance with the community's goals and plans around the station area. Next slide. And then zooming in, you all are familiar with US 12 and kind of the current parking lot. And then south of US 12 is where NICTD has proposed kind of a secondary lot, and that's within both Ogden Dunes and Portage. And so we've looked at those areas, and just to remind folks of kind of the station area itself, again, that is a separate process. And so we're working to understand what NICTD has put forth as they are doing their engineering of the double track project, and then the improvements to the parking lots, which several members of the community have been involved with. And I know there's been a lot of feedback provided to NICTD over the course of the past several months in that regard. But really, this is the, kind of the parking lot layout that we're understanding, and we're honestly trying to work with, and trying to think through kind of what the economic development opportunities are around it for both the communities of Ogden Dunes and Portage. Next slide. So, as we kind of zoom out a little bit further, you can see kind of the area here, and then you've got two circles, a 10-minute walk and a 20-minute walk, and that's as the crow flies. So the idea is, if you were to have some success and development within kind of, let's say, this 20-minute walk area of the station, number one, a lot of the existing Ogden Dunes community is walkable to the station today. And some of the areas south of 12 could also be walkable in the future. And there could be opportunities to, activate places like, the National Park West Beach in maybe a different way, with some new trail areas, and trying to embrace the national park in a meaningful way as well. Next slide. Anchors are another important thing that we looked at as we are trying to define this boundary, and it's not necessarily looking to impact, for instance, here, the Ogden Dunes government area in any kind of negative way, but just trying to think through creative ways to optimize the ability for the community to perhaps see, a controlled amount of investment in certain areas. And we start with, looking at the anchors, what's important to the community, where are the parks, where are the town hall, things like that. And how can we think through that, and how could that maybe have a role in the process? We also look at commercial areas, and kind of in this area, there's not a lot of commercial, except for south on 94. There's a small gas station and a real estate office on US 12, but by and large part, there's not a lot of commercial today in this area. We've also looked at industrial, and a lot of that industrial has been in place for many, many, many years, and we're not necessarily looking to impact that in any way as well. Residential areas, so Ogden Dunes itself, we're trying to support and to protect the single-family residential areas that are in Ogden Dunes. So as you see kind of the light yellow area, that's an area that we're not looking at impacting at all. There are some areas further south, both in Ogden Dunes and in neighboring Portage, that may have some opportunity in the future as different areas do potentially develop over time. And then, as Eric was talking about earlier, vacant, underutilized, or publicly owned land. Often this is what we think of as low-hanging fruit. These are areas that we look at as part of a study area to determine if there may be an interest in, for instance, a small area or a small parcel redeveloping in a way that could be beneficial to the community, could bring a service or a business into the community that does not exist today, or a different housing type. And trying to think through kind of these vacant lands or underutilized or publicly owned lands in a way that's really creative. And that's what we've tried to do with Ogden Dunes here. So that gets us to a composite boundary, and this is just for the Ogden Dunes portion of kind of a future Ogden Dunes and Portage TDD area. Again, we'll have a Portage meeting in the future to discuss that component of the project. But this is about 18 acres, so it's a fairly small area. And we think this is maybe an area that there is some opportunity. Now, we understand, from the community that there may be some areas that you want to preserve and maybe would want to be removed from this boundary, and we understand that. So the next slide, Sherry, is kind of a zoom in of that area. And some of the thoughts, you know, as we were walking through this process with town leadership, is, you know, we're trying to preserve the single family residential areas within the community, but then also trying to think creatively about, you know, what vacant areas do exist both north of 12 and south of 12, and, you know, thinking creatively about things like, you know, the government center, the fire station. Is there a small parcel that could be carved out, and maybe there's a small business that could go in to complement what exists in the community today? So that's the type of thing we were thinking about north of 12, south of 12, and I'll let Eric to speak to this in more detail. There may be more opportunities tied to, you know, a larger expansive area within Portage that could be developed in the future. TIF district, Eric explained a little bit about that. There is not a TIF district today within Ogden Dunes. However, within Portage, you can kind of see this area in pink. There is a large TIF district. So there would be some interplay as that portion of the TDD is developed in the future. And I'll turn it over to Eric to talk about complementary community growth.
Thanks, Aaron, and thank you all for continuing to be a part of the presentation. We only have a couple more slides here, but I think that as Aaron kind of talked through some of the areas that we have been contemplating, it's always helpful to understand what kind of visual, you know, that could connect with. And so as Aaron alluded to, north of US 12, there are a handful of publicly, you know, owned sites that potentially could be candidates for something that would be more of an amenity to the town. These images here speak to a quaint scale of sort of small restaurants or small coffee shops and that sort of thing that could potentially be in that same zone as some of that public land is today, just north of US 12. And again, the scale of this is intended to be deliberately modest, much different than the kind of things that we would see in other communities, but recognizing the special qualities of Ogden Dunes. We wanted to test this idea with you all and take the temperature on it and understand whether or not this is something that could find a place north of US 12 and that small area that Aaron mentioned as a potential area of the boundary. South of US 12, that's where, of course, the parking, the bulk of the parking area is, or the new parking area is. And as we've been thinking through these NICTD owned sites, we also know that those parking areas could change over time. So as NICTD is creating their engineering drawings so that those parking lots are built to the capacities necessary to support the ridership, those will be built as surface asphalt parking lots. Over time, those parking lots could potentially change into development. Of course, we'd still need to maintain parking spaces. So those spaces would be sort of recaptured and into parking garages or parking decks. But the kind of development that could happen south of US 12 could support more commercial activity and also could support some residential activity too. That would be different, obviously, than north of 12, where there's a much different scale, much different sort of existing character. But south of US 12, there may be other opportunities right at that parking area. And as Aaron mentioned, further to the south of the parking area, that's where really we work into the area of Portage. And in that area, there could be a whole host of other types of development opportunities and growth opportunities. Much of that area is undeveloped today. Although, as you know, growth has been steadily occurring closer and closer to that Stagecoach Road zone. So these images really sort of depict the opportunity for this this area south of US 12. And again, we want to test these thoughts with you all this evening. Next slide, please. And so just to refresh, you know, within the boundaries, we do feel that there are all kinds of activities that can occur, some of which are preservation activities, some of which strengthening and redevelopment activities, and so on and so forth. So really, it's a tool that allows us to create an economic tool that can promote investment in terms of community infrastructure by drawing the boundary initially, and then dialing into the right kind of development that you'd like to see to sustain the community that you'd like to have. Next slide, please. And I think I've mentioned this a number of times at this point, but we want to make sure that you know, Ogden Dunes and every other community that we're working in has strong vitality looking forward. We want to really understand the qualities of today, but make sure that those are preserved and enhanced over time as well. And you're integral to that. So continue to give us feedback. Tonight's a good opportunity for that. We'll go through questions here in just a moment, but remember to also visit the webpage. This is where you can continue to interact and you can continue to learn and follow our progress. And the webpage is nwitdd.com. And that will be where you can not only continue to learn, but as we refine content, as we work on other station areas, you'll be able to see that work as well. Do visit the gallery at the firehouse if you can. This is where you can, on your own and at your own pace, take in all the information we've presented. You can also do that at the web page if it's more convenient for you. And then we will be scheduling out same kind of presentation for Portage. And we'll make sure that that information is also up on the web page and published so that you can attend that. After this evening, we'll continue to refine the draft boundary that we've presented based upon feedback. And that'll again take us to the point where we can eventually hold public hearings with the RDA board and then eventually the state budget committee. Next slide, please. And so with that, I think we're right at 45 minutes or so here. We appreciate your patience. We know that you've got questions. And so with that, I'll as these questions pop up, I will be able to hopefully supply some answers. And if I don't have an answer, I'll rely on several of our teammates to chime in. And I do think that this first question, I do think I will ask maybe Bill Sheldrake to jump in on this first question. Does a TDD work like a TIF and capture all increments of AV? Bill, would you mind taking that one?
Sure. If I understand what your question is, it's does it take in all types of assessed value that are incremental within the district? So a TIF, when it's established, can be specifically directed to collect real property increment, or it can collect a personal property, business personal property increment, or both. And the law would allow TDDs to do the same in terms of property tax assessed value as a TIF. We have not talked very much about business personal property increment being included in these TDDs, but the law would allow that. And so I think I would just state that that's what the law allows, but we haven't made any decisions on that.
Thanks, thanks, Bill. The next question is, what what makes you think we have growth goals? Well, that's, I think, what we're here to learn. We think we've learned a lot about your community and sort of the essence of Ogden Dunes to this point. We know that as NICTD plans their parking area south of US 12, that could be an opportunity over time for growth south of US 12 to sort of take the place of that surface parking lot. But again, we're here to listen and understand whether or not we are on the right track. We know that communities change and evolve constantly, some more than others, of course. And so keep in mind that the boundary in and of itself doesn't predict growth. Maybe that's an important distinction to make here. So the boundary allows for the capture of revenue within the lines. And it doesn't force growth to happen, but it simply allows that growth to, any growth within the boundary to be accrued in that revenue growth. And so what the boundary can enable, however, is investment, public investment in those areas that are included in the boundary. And so the boundary doesn't necessarily predict new development. It does capture incremental tax growth inside the boundary, but it is a tool that the community can use to reinvest within the boundary for other things, other infrastructure needs to support your community's goals. So hopefully that clarifies. The next question is, please cover portage. Yes, we will do that. I hope to hope that you all can also attend the meeting when we do get to the point where we can cover the portage side. Certainly, I know that you will all have an interest in that. So please do attend, and we'll make that announcement when we're able to about the meeting date and time. And then there's a second part here, and explain how you are not going to use eminent domain on the properties. The RDA actually doesn't have eminent domain authority. Anything that would be acquired from the NICTD side of things is on a different process, a different sort of a track, no pun intended here. But so questions with respect to the parking areas, really those ought to be geared toward NICTD. They will obviously be the group that sort of carries out the engineering of the parking areas and engineering of the station areas and the ultimate development of those areas. The next question, as I read through it, actually I think is maybe going on to the same topic here. How is developing undeveloped land preserving open space, or does turning tree-filled land into parking lots considered a creating open spaces? I think maybe this question is about the NICTD parking lot as well. Again, I'll defer to NICTD. I don't want to misspeak for them. I don't want to say the wrong answer for NICTD. They're not here tonight, but I know that they'd be happy to take your questions specific to their planning efforts. And I do encourage you to get in touch with NICTD. And if there's if we can help connect folks with NICTD, we're happy to do that. The next one here is, all of the pop-up questions are geared towards Munster. Is there an Ogden Dunes Portage set of questions? So I'm not sure. Aaron,
Hey,
do you have an answer for
yeah,
that?
let me jump in. And apologies for this. When we launched the poll, we accidentally hit the wrong button and launched the poll for Munster. And so we're very sorry for that, but the questions are the same. So if you answered those questions, your responses will be captured and aggregated for the Ogden Dunes specific meeting. Again, apologies, we had a typo on that one poll that we launched.
Thanks, Aaron. All right, the next question here, I think I covered earlier. Are you going to use eminent domain on properties south of US 12? I think we've covered that one. I think that's more geared toward NICTD, considering the RDA doesn't have that authority, and NICTD is the group who is working on the parking lot south of US 12. The next question, what are Ogden Dunes growth goals since we are residentially limited? Well, I don't know that the growth goals are exactly what we're focused on. We're focused on how to create a boundary that allows you to achieve your goals. And so whatever those goals are, the boundary can help you to achieve those goals. I do want to reiterate that south of US 12, there is a good opportunity to move beyond the residential limitations that you do have, and to take advantage of the opportunity over time for the parking areas to transition to something different. There might be, as I mentioned, some modest opportunity to expand that residential limitation north of 12 as well on some of the land in around the firehouse, et cetera, with the right scale of commercial development, something that would be seen as a positive element. Of course, that's all up to you. The boundary is really an opportunity for you to reinvest in your community to get to the growth goals that you'd like to see. So the next question here is, there is no mention of the importance of the Ogden Dune Beach to our community. Why? What can you do to help us with that rather than giving us a restaurant? Well, we know that the Ogden Dunes Beach is important. We've tried to pull away from that edge for I think the reasons that, that's a residential edge. We want to preserve the residential character there and not bring the boundary up to the lakefront. So we've pulled away from that for those reasons. We've heard loud and clear that is a very sacred part of the community, and so we've stayed away from that. If you would like us to reconsider that, we're here to take that kind of input, feedback. But we felt that from the dialogue that we've had with the leadership in the community that attention ought to be focused closer to US 12. And that we should take really modest approaches to anything happening north of 12. The next question here is, increased ridership and development of the area would increase traffic to the area. The Miller Station today has a similar layout, a large parking lot south of 12, and the pedestrians just run all over 12 when trains arrive. What is planned to help efficiently route vehicle and pedestrian traffic with all of the new development? So this is a multi-pronged question. So part of this does get to what NICTD is proposing for the crossings over US 12 with crosswalks and with traffic signals and those sorts of things, which I won't be able to really speak to. The new development that would happen here could likely, if it's right against US 12, would generate traffic south of US 12 likely. I should say the traffic arriving to that development would be able to get in and out of it south of US 12. So I don't see it, if development were to occur south of US 12, a lot of people trying to walk back and forth across US 12. So I don't know that would be an issue. And if any development did occur north of US 12, I think that would be, for the Ogden Dunes community specifically, that would be for folks who might be able to walk or bike to that, maybe drive if they'd like to drive, but it would be all contained north of US 12 would be an assumption. Of course, how that all occurs is all, subject to future plans as they would or would not come about. And it looks like we do have a handful more questions. We need help with our beach, not a restaurant or a cute coffee shop. The restaurant in Marina Shores cannot stay open consistently. Why are we not mentioning the beach? I think I might have covered this just a moment ago. If this is something you'd like us to pivot towards, that's something we can try to do, but we've really held the boundary back from the beach for the reasons I mentioned earlier. We're trying to really stay discreet with where that occurs. We want to make sure that the residential character is intact and preserved there. The TDD process does not increase our taxes, but helps the town to possibly make changes if the town wants them. That's correct. So, and Bill, feel free to chime in here, but I'll maybe try to address this initially. The boundary itself is a tool that allows the incremental revenue growth to be captured, not a new tax. So as taxes change year over year, that the incremental growth in those taxes that are naturally occurring today, that would be captured in the future within the TDD boundary. And once that incremental growth is captured, then that growth can be reinvested back into the same boundary. And that's in terms of local income tax and property tax. And so the local income tax part of that is an additional opportunity beyond just the property tax that is collected today and invested in various ways today. The TDD boundary would also allow for the local income tax increment to also be captured and reinvested within the same boundary. So that is an additional tool that is not a new tax. It's simply collecting the incremental growth that occurs. So hopefully I answered that, Bill. If I didn't, feel free to augment.
You did a great job, Eric. You did a great job.
You've coached me well. The next question here is US 12 is a sacred part of the community of Ogden Dunes 2 that does not need growth. Why do you feel we need growth here when there are several communities nearby that we support? That might be the case. We see the opportunity specifically south of US 12 where, over time, again, the NICTD parking lot can change. And it seems like that might be something you would want to explore in terms of growth. That could be a benefit potentially over just the surface parking lot in perpetuity. And so we included the parking lot there because of that potential. Certainly north of US 12 is a different story. And so if you all feel that the growth in that area or investment in that area is not needed, then we can certainly take that input as we continue to make refinements. The next comment here is how much influence do you have in design, land use, et cetera, with everything you say is NICTD's, with everything you say is a NICTD's domain. So, so we really don't have any control over land use because that's held in the local authority. So the town maintains that control. What we're hoping to do is allow the boundary to piggyback onto the land use that you'd like to see. And for as things change over time, occur over time, that increment is then, tax revenue increment is collected within the boundary. And then the NICTD component of this is really quite factual that everything within the parking area is within the NICTD domain. However, when it does come time to think about, or when we do think about the opportunity for that parking lot to change over time, that is a real opportunity. That is something that the FTA does support with their joint development authority. And so as we think through the future state of that parking lot and growth that could occur, that is an opportunity. So we don't want to take that off the table. We want to make sure that if there's a way to improve that parking area over time, that we present that to you for your consideration. The next question, are there plans to widen US 12 to accommodate this expansion of parking lot? Again, that may be something you want to ask NICTD specifically about the capacity of the US 12 with respect to the parking lot demand. The next question is, the town wants to develop a small business area. What support do you provide? I think this is where we do have the ability within the TDD boundary to support that kind of a goal, whether it's with infrastructure or whether it's with some incentives that could be potentially provided through the incremental revenue that we capture. These are the kinds of things that are able to be supported with the boundary that we would we would eventually draw and get approved. Bill, do you want to say anything more to the broader suite of opportunities for that that revenue to be utilized?
Sure, Eric. I guess I'm looking at this question, if the town wants to develop a small business area. I think this is the kind of thing that a TDD and the legislation was really designed for. If the town found a small area of geography that would make sense for Ogden Dune residents to have some business in, then the incremental growth there, the income taxes, again, not any rate change. There isn't any increase in the tax rate. It's simply applying the rate that is extant in that area, in those taxing districts, applying those rates, and the revenues that are generated then could be used to issue bonds, for instance. And in this case, one of the things that the legislation provides for is that the RDA could actually issue bonds, so that the RDA would have a little bit better ability, perhaps, issuing bonds through the state of Indiana, using the increment as debt service, which would provide a stronger, lower interest rate, a better credit, frankly, that could help Ogden Dunes realize its objectives. Again, if the town wanted to develop a small business area, as this question posits.
Thanks, Phil. I think we've reached sort of the current list of questions, maybe. Are there any others yet? Well, we'll hang out on the line here for a little while more to see if other questions pop in. These are great, though. This is the kind of feedback we were hoping to gather this evening, and we appreciate your interest. We knew we'd probably get a number of questions about the parking area and things that NICTD is doing, because we've fielded the same questions in previous communities, just within this same format. So we knew we would get those, and we've answered those all in the same way. We defer to NICTD to answer those questions, just because we want to make sure that you get the right information. It looks like we might have a question. One of the pleasures of living in Ogden Dunes is the abundance of wildlife. What are your plans to address the disruption, displacement of the various wildlife in the area? Well, we're really not focused on strategies like that in this effort, given that we're really looking to draw this this transit development district boundary. But I think you raise a great point. I think that there's an interest, obviously, in preserving those natural areas in the community. I think that's something that the town and others are really focused on, and hopefully there are strategies in place, or that folks are working on to really target that question. But the boundary is really more about trying to target the right areas of the community for either achieving your future goals for development, or achieving some goals for reinvestment. So I think as things are sort of winding down, we'll wait another minute or so here, just in case we get another question or two. Okay, looks like we have one more here. Can Ogden Dunes Town Councilwoman Carolyn answer, what are the town's goals or thoughts on this revenue potential? If you cannot answer now, at what town council meeting will this be discussed? So, Carolyn, might I invite you to provide a thought on this one?
Well, and it's interesting that that question would be asked, because one of the questions that was posed earlier is what are the goals of Ogden Dunes? And I do think that that is a question for, you know, the Plan Commission. I think it's a question for the BZA, and I also think it's a question for the town council as a whole to think about. I mean, there are real opportunities that we may have, as you talked about, you know, the small business section, whether that happens or not, but that would give us the opportunity for, you know, the ability to work with the RDA for bonds, for some of the other projects that we would like to see happen. And so, as some of the people on this call may know, I am going off the council the end of December. I will continue to be on this committee going forward because I've been appointed to it. And so, you know, I would like to hear your thoughts about that. And certainly the new town council should be thinking about what they might do related to the opportunities that this would offer for us. I think one of the things I would also like to say is that I know that the beach is a real issue for all of us, and I know you all are aware of that because I've been bringing that forward to you all over the past number of months. And you know, this TDD does not go. It is not going there because that's a residential area, and we want to keep that residential. And so, but I think there are opportunities just to the north of the tracks that might be a possibility for us. And certainly I would encourage the new board, the new town council to think about that, as well as the Planning Commission and the BZA.
Thank you, Carolyn. We have a comment here. Thank you for the presentation explanations. Thanks, Carolyn, for your insight and service to the town. All right, well, as we do wind down, I do want to just remind you, there are multiple ways to continue to provide your input. I think we've kind of discussed those throughout the evening, but please do visit the gallery. There are places to provide input, and there obviously on the webpage, there is a place to provide input there as well, www.nwitdd.com. And as I wrap up, I just want to say thanks to all of you for participating this evening. You've been a great audience, and you've posed a lot of good questions. We will certainly take your information and feedback into account here, and appreciate your participation. I'll also ask if Carolyn or Sherry have any final words as we close the meeting.
I would like to just thank all of you all for your presentation. This was so different than the presentation we had from NICTD. We could see the questions that were asked. You all answered all those questions. Sherry, Eric, Aaron, and Bill, we want to thank you for that. And certainly I do encourage the residents to go to the sites that Eric mentioned. And if you've got other comments that are specific to what this was about, I encourage you to put those there. I do want to mention one other thing, and that is that these are two very separate issues. The NICTD issue is what they're doing with the property and how they're going to be doing the double track project. What the RDA is doing is very different, and I appreciate their openness and their ability, their willingness to share all that information with us. And thank you all for being a part of this. And I want to thank the residents who participated both online here, but also on Facebook, because it is on Facebook as well. So thank you all.
Thank you, Carolyn. And just in closing, I would like to say thank you all for your time and participation tonight. Cannot echo enough what Eric and Carolyn have said already, but the RDA, we want to continue to address your concerns to help you better understand the coming economic development and social benefits, and to again relay the message that a TDD complements the economic development and growth path of your community. So we want to hear from you. So I believe we've probably oversaid it at this point, but please do visit nwitdd.com, look through the information, submit your comments to us. We monitor multiple times a day, and we will get back to you with the response. So again, thank you all for your time, and have a great rest of your evening.
And Sherry, I'll just point out that the information we presented will be on the webpage, so do check that out. That's one of the questions. And then I think we had probably between the Facebook presentation that was simultaneous to this and our presentation here, maybe 30 or 40 or so people. I was trying to do double duty by looking at numbers at the same time as presenting, but I just wanted to address these final comments. So thanks everybody again. We appreciate your time, and do stay in touch.
Thank you.
Thank you. All done.